So I'm going to throw out another quick question, which is, well, Jews have wandered for millennia, and they've experienced persecution and alienation, which forced them to adapt and absorb. We've been continual immigrants, and how does that impact creativity in general, and has it impacted you? None of you were actual immigrants, but your parents might have been.
Did what? Just say it again.
Well, just how has persecution, the
Yeah.
sort of history of persecution and alienation and being outcasts and having to move from place to place, I mean, how has that shaped Jewish creativity?
My problem was I experienced no anti-Semitism, and I was always looking for it. I was in Queens, and how anti-Semitic could it be? Everybody in the block was Jewish. Every once in a while, the Italian kids would come from the other block and, like mock beat us up. But I don't think, it wasn't like a pogrom or anything like that. No, my parents were very, very aware of it. But once again, I reacted against the idea of persecution because I didn't, in New York City and where I grew up, I did not, I mean, undoubtedly it had an experience.
But historically,
Historically, one of the prime, in terms of humor, one of the prime functions of humor, besides entertainment and solidarity, is coping itself. And so this is a strong function. And the other thing I think that it did, the persecution, is it led to this sort of classic self-deprecating Jewish humor, which is not sort of hating yourself or anything, sort of putting itself in a realistic position. So not the last century, but the early part, the whole thing was, you understand you were in two cultures and you could be discriminated against.
It's sort of a preemptive strike in a way as well. If you make fun of yourself, then you're already doing it before someone else can do it.
And you're doing it better.
Yes.
You're doing it better. And so in a way, there's a type of superiority. And there was a saying, it says, dress British but think Yiddish.
See, I think actually in that being outside, you have one of two phenomena. One is what I used to call, or still do call, bow tie Jews, which I used to know very well at Harvard, which is they want to be British, and so they want to be as Boston Brahmin as they can, and they pass. And so they wear bow ties just like the Boston Brahmins, etc. The other, I think, response to it, which is the response my family had, which is, who gives a shit what they think? It's irrelevant. We're just going to do what we're going to do. And so whatever the peer pressure was, I think the natural tendency, at least in my family, was to do just the opposite. And so if everyone was going left, we were going right. It had to be the right thing. And so we had a very frequent run-ins with authority, I would say. Just whatever the gym teacher said couldn't possibly be right. And so mom would be down at the principal's office and, having to defend her kids. And so I think this was a very common experience that we had, which is whatever, the authority figure, wherever it was, we were to push against it, rebel against it. And I think that was pretty much expected in my house. And mom really was down at school virtually every other day. She had 3 of us.
I did it with jokes. I mean, I think a real transformative experience for me was in college. And I was a terrible student. I didn't go to class. I didn't do anything because it was these lecture halls. And anyway, I was bad. A bad guy. So anyway, this is a sociology final, and I've been to the first class. I haven't been to any class. And I come in late. And my hair is much longer than is now even. Come in late, and I run to get my blue book, and I start scribbling nonsense, because I don't really know what I'm doing and everything, but I think it's better to look like you're moving. But I catch the eye of the teacher who comes over to me, and looms over me, and says, because I hadn't been there, I said, "Who the hell are you?" And I waited a beat and said, I could very well ask you the same question. And like, it so transformed that situation And it was like this power that you had. I mean, instead of like, just against authority, saying that no matter what your position was, if you were funny, if you could transform it in some way, all of a sudden, actually, you had the upper hand. And actually, the guy gave me a C, so. And I'm sure it wasn't for whatever I wrote in that book.
Liz?
I think the question of persecution is historically, of course, central to a lot of our Jewish experience, but it's not central to mine. So how do I honor what I know to have been true, but live completely honestly now with this Jewish community in this life now? And I don't think, hearing the Bialik just now is just, that is that. And yes, my father wore a board at Passover. This was the story we grew up with because they were always beating him up. And so yes, he wore a board every for a week or something. I understand that. But for me, the question of it's more like in our household, it was do something about it. And then it becomes art. So what is the art that contrasts and moves into that? And it's not the same thing as saying, yes, our kids need to experience adversity. They do. Yes, we don't want to make it too easy for them. Your notion about rejection is absolutely true. I mean, I just had to write a little something for a magazine, and I said, the number of rejections and they still hurt every time, but that's still not persecution. That's merely rejection. and what does it mean then to create, for us to be making a better world, and how is art a part of that? And that's where I think, at least in my house, it turned around a little bit.
I don't know what neighborhoods you grew up in, but we grew up in Chicago. We had plenty of anti-Semitism, and actually, plenty of it, because we were the only Jews on the block, and the guys next door were Irish, and we had a lot of people from Appalachia who just moved to Chicago, and we had a lot of fights about being called kikes, and we also happened to be, my mom was early on heavily involved in the civil rights movement, so we happened to be a family that had a lot of African Americans coming over to the house, and so we were constantly being called nigger lovers. So this is not,
Yes,
I don't know what neighborhoods you guys grew up in, but it wasn't mine.
But that's interesting, Zeke, because I have that exact same experience, but I don't consider it persecution. I just think, okay, let's change it, change them.
I don't know, I went to, so when I was a young kid, went to a country club and, tried to become a golf caddy. We don't hire your type.
Well, I think, but that
it wasn't,
Yeah, I think that was different. It's certainly different in New York City. That's one of the transformations that happened in New York City from the 1890s, really, to the 1930s. And it's interesting. There are jokes in the New Yorker magazine when you look in 1930 where you see that transformation. You see there's a joke in which there's a judge who's clearly Irish, the way he's drawn, and there's a very waspy-looking guy, and the lawyer is saying, my client wants to change his name from Trelawney to Goldstein for purposes of commerce. Because the New York is really changing that way in the 30s and 40s and becoming, much more Catholic and, much more Jewish.
Josh, do you have anything to add to this, to the persecution question? We've sort of gone away from it, but the persecution
in my
historically...
field, there are people trying to claim to be Jewish because of we talked about the history. So a lot of people saying, well, actually, the mother of my mother of my mother of my mother was Jewish, so therefore I am Jewish. So that's. I actually did not experience anti-Semitism. I never heard the word kike. I didn't in my generation, although I'm not that much younger than you. I was born in '67.
I just remembered a central passage in the Cudahy book. Freud was very struck by a production of Oedipus that he saw, I presume in French. I think he saw it in Paris. And apparently it was he alludes to that production in a lot of his work. And Cudahy kind of brilliantly puts in Oedipus what happens, the generated thing that happened in the past is this young man meets at an intersection an old man who's arrogant, and he kills him. And he doesn't know that it's his father who tried to kill him when he was an infant. That's the backstory of Oedipus. And Cudahy finds a thing in Freud's journals that Freud was very struck by, big traumatic incident in Freud's childhood. Freud and his father, he's a little boy, your father, his big, powerful father. His father failed to step aside into the curb to let the Gentile man who was coming toward them pass, and the Gentile man knocks Freud's father's hat into the dirt, into the gutter, and Freud's father meekly accepts this reprimand. And Freud talks about how immensely upset he was. His father, he thought was the embodiment of strength, acceded to this persecution. And Cudahy does a very good job of suggesting that the nerve and aggressive clarity of Freud talking about the Oedipus complex as being sort of fundamental part of the human psyche is generated partly by that feeling of dismay at realizing that because he was Jewish, he was subjected to this, and that the incivility of it was. As I say, it's in many ways an unpleasant book. It's not a book I'm sure I approve of in every way, but it has some ideas worth thinking about in it.
Wow.